Welcome back to Dirtbag Baseball Talk, everybody. Great to have you back again, Jason and myself, as always. And on this episode, we're going to get going ahead and we're going to start talking about the hip region and, terminology that you hear. You see all kinds of it on social media right now. It's ever present with an extension to the ground force that we spoke about on the last episode and it's getting up into the hip region. Hip mobility, the craze of it, how it relates to the overall impact and effect of your efficiency or non-efficiency or inefficiency in your throwing or your pitching. So Jason was, really wanted to dive into it. And thanks a lot for the people that started questioning us and asking us, reaching out to us as well about this region of the body and how it impacts the rest of the throwing motion. So on that note, let's get up, get after it, and get dirty. Jason, what do you say, brother? I see you got your image in the background. So your show, brother.
Awesome. Got the glasses going, the skeleton out. I feel like being a nerd. So we often hear the term mobility, and now there's a big hip mobility craze. So I've got two studies here. One was from Louisiana Tech, and the other one, so that was from, 2011, another one from 2005. So we've got plenty of objective data showing that stretching decreases performance. So with these sprinters, there were 4 control groups. 3 of them did different types of sprinting. The three of them that were doing the different types of stretching, the 4th group didn't stretch. So the 3 groups that stretched, their sprint times went up, meaning they were slower. So it decreased their force output and overall performance. So that's something to think about when you take the field is, why am I stretching? Something we'll dive into now is, structure dictates function. So we can actually do a lot of harm. And I've seen a lot of torn hip labrums because of some of the things that I've seen on the internet. In that pitching conference, I'll show you one of the stretches that someone on stage was recommending. And they said, if you can't get into that range, grab a kettlebell and let that weight kind of force you into it. So if you have to force your way into anything, it's probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I would think so. And that's really important because, as you know, Dirtbags, we've been talking about it and it's really getting away from the buzzwords or really identifying some of the terminology that is buzzwords that really isn't concrete to what's going to actually help you develop and become a better player or a better human being all the way around. So, yeah, I mean, you've got your hip up there. What are some things that, let's start off with this. What are some things that really drive you crazy when you're at clinics or you're talking with players that come into your Elite Edge Fitness for the first time thinking they know a lot and you don't want to take their knees out and make them feel inferior, but what is it that you would recommend for the listeners to really be aware of when you're talking about in the hip?
That's a great question. So one thing I would really steer away from, I've seen some kind of velocity at all costs programs on social media and the internet, and they say you have to have a certain amount of mobility around a joint to hit 90 miles per hour or to hit a certain performance milestone. But what they don't realize is that structure dictates function. So I've had some pretty high level pro athletes on my table, and we, rotate their hips in, we do it actively and passively. They don't have that range. So if you've got a hip socket that doesn't have as much range, you're just going to cause impingement. You could, cause a tear in your hip labrum. And I've talked to some athletes that, they've actually torn their hip labrum because of some of the stretches that these instructors want them to do. So when you're looking at these certifications that are all about range of motion, remember, if you can't actively get back there on your own, then you most likely can't produce force there. So just remember, mobility without stability is vulnerability. So if you force that limb into a range where you can't actively hold a contraction, then you're probably going to be a lot more vulnerable to injury.
Yeah, no question about it. And when you're talking about actively or passively, explain that a little bit more so the listeners can understand what it is. If, I'm sure there's other trainers out there that are using those terminology as well, and they may be afraid to ask them when they're working with them. What does that mean?
So actively is where they can get on their own. So for example, that's all the active external rotation I have. That's all I can do on my own without forcing it. So passive would be if you grab my arm and then stretched it back that way. So that's where you would definitely find your structural limitation really fast. Active range of motion is, I like to say active range of control, because I'll do specific muscle tests at end range to make sure that you can sustain a contraction there. Otherwise, we need to make sure that the range you do have is stable before we try to force more range and then shut everything down.
Yeah, definitely. Just understand that the difference between it, because I think, let's be honest, the majority of stretching, or certainly segments of stretching on a ball field, in the bullpen, wherever it is, segments of it become the passive part of it, right? Team up with a partner. If you can't get into that range of motion, like you said, team up with a partner and get there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I've even seen it. I've seen some physical therapists do it as well. So some of the kind of funny things. So we know we've got plenty of information out there showing that stretching shuts muscles down. But even before we get up to the hip, so this is a right leg. If we look at the knee, so a lot of the called the scissor move. But if this foot's left behind, again, this is a right foot, this torquing that we have at the knee. So on the outside, we've got the MCL, medial collateral ligament. Actually, on the outside, we got the lateral, inside the medial, and then we've got the meniscus here. So medial meniscus and lateral meniscus. I got turned around. So keep in mind, when you're leaving that back foot and externally rotating and the femur's going, you're causing a lot more stress on those ligaments than you need to. Not only that, but I mean, if you keep doing that repetitively with a lot of force, you're probably going to have a meniscus tear. So keep that in mind, that be conscious of where your lower leg is in relation to your thigh or your femur, and also the foot, because you can do a lot more harm than good. So in baseball, we kind of, got unplugged. We hear that, you got to have a lot of mobility, right? So if we look at, this guy can probably throw 120, right? By popular baseball standards, that's what they think everybody should be able to do. Same thing with this guy. He probably throws $130, doesn't he? We got to draft that guy right away. So this is one that I saw up on stage at a conference. So you see how this hip is internally rotated almost 90 degrees.
Yep.
So a lot of athletes that I work with on the table, even passively, they don't have that range. So this pitching conference, they were saying, grab a kettlebell and sit into that. So again, if you don't have that range, you're probably going to tear your labrum, or you're going to have some hip pain. But when you're jamming joints and shutting things down like that, you're going to have problems. So then it's going to affect your running. It's going to affect your throwing. It's going to affect your hitting. So here you can see we have a picture of two different hip sockets. So this one is facing more to the side, and this one's facing more to the front. So you can see the big difference in the hip sockets, right? See how that one's more to the side?
Yeah.
This one's more to the front.
Yeah.
So these two athletes are not going to have the same mobility. So in these certifications and these online programs that tell you have to get a certain amount of range, here's proof right there that we have a lot of structural deviations. So that's called the acetabulum, the hip socket. And then if we also look at these femurs, so if we look up here, you can see the shapes are different, right? This one has kind of a longer neck. So not only with the acetabulum or the hip socket, but also with the femur. So with that ball and socket joint, one might have a lot more mobility than the other one does. That's why we'll see some people that can really internally rotate. So we see this a lot with gymnasts. At a young age, they keep stretching and they're kind of pushing their structural limitations as the growth plates haven't hardened yet. So their body adapts to it. So it's going to give them that range. And it may sound like it's good to have all that range, but later on in life, you're going to be in a lot of pain because, again, muscle stabilized joints. So if you can't control that extra range, and anatomically you weren't really designed to do that, then you're going to have more problems. So some of the most wrecked people that I have on my table, were dancers or gymnasts because they're hypermobile. So here's another good angle. So this would be looking down at the femur. So kind of like that.
Yeah.
So just like that. So you can see there, we also have some differences in the structure of it. So that's a big thing that, is really bothersome in baseball, is that we've got these certifications that are teaching you have to have a certain amount of mobility. And then we have these performance programs that I see these athletes, I feel like they're getting ripped off because these guys, they may have a master's degree in science, but there's zero practical application, and they're just regurgitating, things that they learned in class. So they probably wrote some great papers, they passed some, really big tests. They still don't have the basic understanding of structure dictates function. So athletes, stop jamming your joints and expecting that it's going to get better. It's not going to make you any better. It's actually going to make you worse. Coaches, same thing. Don't look at one athlete who has crazy mobility and can control it just because they're the same height or the same kind of build as somebody else. There's so much going on inside that you have no idea what it is. So if that's their end range, then that's where you should stop. So here's another picture of the stretch that they were recommending, on stage, and I've seen several instructors and coaches talk about it. So we actually see he's got some side bend here. And the reason he's doing that, what we call lateral flexion, is because he doesn't have that range at the hip. So it may appear, if his back was straight, he'd probably be angled this way a little bit, right?
Yeah.
But he's got lateral flexion, so he's using his obliques and everything that side bends to make up for that lack of range, because for some reason he feels like he really needs to get into that position. So right here, you can see we're definitely jamming joints because he doesn't have that range. So he's trying to compensate with another part of his body. So that's another big problem with a lot of these certifications and programs that are being taught out there. They don't have the basic understanding. That guy throws a $130. They don't have the basic understanding on how to evaluate these athletes. And if they're putting a program for you online and they haven't seen you in person, they have no idea what they're talking about. I saw one program, guy blew out his elbow a week after leaving a popular weighted ball training place. I signed up for this program, thousands of dollars, and it's talking about whether you're an ectomorph, an endomorph, or a mesomorph. It doesn't matter. It's extremely it's just wasteful information at that point, because they don't understand how his structure is and what range he can actually get, and is he even stable there. And that athlete, he didn't have any internal or external rotation on his back hip. So, he had some issues. So even with their program, they're not talking about structure or function at all. We're making sure that he's stable before they ask him to do things. So that last one I had, in baseball, they think they got to be real flexible.
Jeez.
So when is enough?
That hurts looking at it.
That's what I always ask, these coaches and athletes. According to everybody, that should be the norm if you want to throw 90 miles an hour, right? Or maybe this guy's at 100 miles an hour, who knows? But it's kind of ridiculous that they have these goals in mind, for mobility, that they think you have to hit in order to reach a certain performance milestone.
You just hit a lot of points on the head. And Dirtbags, you have to understand that I'm learning the exact same as you're learning. That's what's so awesome about this for me personally, with Jason and the power that he has with the knowledge he has. And again, it all comes back to true knowledge, really getting the knowledge. So Jason, you've been very delicate. I appreciate it, and everything else. Turn it loose, big man, because you just hit some nails on the head that I think we got to really get out there, whether the people like it or not. These are some of these moments where they need to hear this. It's not what you want to hear, maybe. So for parents, players that are, let's say, college or older, a high school kid has a pretty good maturity level, but they're still a high school kid. They're going to listen to the coaches and everything else. So is a college kid, but he's starting to get independence in himself. Pros are totally different. So those types of players, but the parents and the coaches of these youth athletes, you said some amazing things. So for me, I would look at it and I would go, oh, well, you're always tight in the hip. You got tight hips, let's say, or whatever. So I'd be that guy that would force my range of motion. And what you're saying there, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Yeah.
Like you're forcing into it instead of, I guess, growing into it to the best you can. So I guess my point is, you cannot lump, as we are all individual humans, and I think that's what gets missed in this whole big thing, is we get clumped together because we play a team sport. So the team is doing it, you do it. And that's no good. That's no good. I think from what you're saying is you have to look at each individual on your team, if you're the coach, and identify and build them as an individual. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And a lot of something that, coaches and instructors don't think about. So if you get cut, your blood coagulates, you form a scab. That's a protective mechanism. If your temperature starts to go up, you perspire to regulate it. So your body doesn't make mistakes. Yep. So when that muscle's tight, your body's not playing a joke on you, or when people say they have a knot in their muscle, okay, we'll untie it. So these things happen for a reason. So that tightness is a protective mechanism. So if your arm's feeling tight because you threw a lot the day before and you can't really get that range, there's a reason for that, because your brain knows, okay, I got to shut that down because it can't do the same thing that it did yesterday safely. And you're risking injury if you go into that range. So you got to remember that, muscles typically tighten up from, they can shut down from stress, trauma, or overuse, but that can cause other muscles to tighten up to try to keep that joint stable. So that's something that people don't think about. They just want to chase the symptom. So if they think, okay, my hamstring's tight. A good example, I had an ultra marathoner come in. Her last run was, I think, 110 miles, multiple stress fractures in her feet, tore some ligaments. And she comes in, and the only thing she complains about tight hamstrings. The only muscle tests that passed were her hamstrings, because they're pulling so damn tight to make up for everything else being beat up and overused. And she thinks that this is a problem. So that's unfortunately how, sports medicine and a lot of these strength coaches look at it, is they think that if something's tight, we need to stretch it out. Well, when you cramp up, what do you do instinctively? You stretch, right? Because it shuts it down. So our brain already knows to tell us if something's cramping up, stretch it out so it shuts down. So that's what, even a lot of physical therapists that I have as my clients and performance coaches, they'll come in and say that something's tight, but we can actually get more range by improving the contractile efficiency, or just making sure it can produce a little bit of force at end range. And then once your brain realizes, okay, the force demand isn't as high, so we kind of lightly increase the load, then it's going to open up that range, and you're going to have that stability that you want. But if you're just focusing on, this is tight, I got to stretch it, you should be thinking about, okay, what could be shut down or overused that's causing that to tighten up and protect me from going into that range where I'm vulnerable. So yeah, the body doesn't make mistakes like that.
Say that again, because I'm sure that gets missed by the majority. And it really stuck out to me again, because you're right. We are trained, we are programmed that, if it's the sore area on my body, that must be the trouble area. Where you're just
right.
saying it may not be chances are it's not the trouble area. It's probably your strong area protecting the problem.
Yeah, just because that's where the smoke is, that doesn't mean that's where the fire is. So that's kind of a good analogy. And, when I ripped my hamstring and had to, stop playing baseball, I found that probably 9.5 out of 10 athletes that come in with a chronic hamstring issue is because they don't have that retraction or reciprocal motion with the other shoulder. So that's what happened to me when I played. My pec was already ripped off the bone, had a couple cortisone shots in the throwing arm. So I had an anterior tilt. So as I'm running, and my right leg should be cycling through this left shoulder. This way is better. This shoulder should be able to retract and come back. But because it was stuck here, the hamstring had to pull harder. So I'll see that, it's a limitation in scapular retraction, or sometimes it's trunk rotation. So, that's, again, with Little League elbow and Little League shoulder, when I get these young athletes on the table and they don't have as much trunk rotation to their throwing side, that doesn't mean we need to stretch it out. We need to make sure that they're stable, because their brain knows it shouldn't keep going into that range and then, placing that demand on it, whether it's, a lot of hard throwing or exercise. So we've got to find out what's shut down and not holding a contraction before we think about, we need to undo this tightness. Or if you are going to stretch a little bit, make sure you follow it up with some isometrics so you actually turn the muscles back on. But if you're stretching things out, you're just shutting down, just like, these Journal of Sports Medicine articles show. So there's some great research out there. But again, if we change nothing, then nothing changes. So you see how high the rate of, or how many sports injuries there are. And it's, again, we've got the smartest doctors, the most advanced technology, but the problem is everyone's an expert. So they just regurgitate these stretching protocols, thinking that we have to have a certain amount of range of motion for performance. And that couldn't be farther from the truth.
So what would you recommend for basic stretching, basic range of mobility throughout the hip? We're talking about the hip area. what are some drills that you would recommend that are probably safe while providing, again, like that structure, that stability that you always talk about?
Mm-hmm. So if you try to get a little bit more range, it's kind of the dosage determines the poison. So if you're stretching a lot, you're gonna cause some damage. I had a client that was here, and she was an athlete, and her hip was bothering her. And I said, well, have you thought about not stretching your hips? Because she spends about 20-30 minutes stretching her hips every day. And I convinced her to stop. A couple days later, she said, wow, my hip pain's gone. So what I would recommend before you get out there and start stretching and thinking about what your range of motion is, I would go through some light movement prep, and I would do some similar motions to what you're about to do, but not nearly as fast or not with as much weight. Because then as you're going through that, you'll kind of restore some muscle tension. And then, that's probably the best thing for you is just, I don't even want to say like active recovery, but just a little bit of movement prep. So if you're about to go out and run some sprints, I'd say start with some, a light jog out, back pedal back, then side shuffles, maybe some high knees, butt kicks. I'd probably do some lunges, jog out the second half if you're going, 90 feet. And then same thing, arms up, lunges, first half, jog out the second half. And then you put that tension back in the muscular system, which is going to keep everything stable. So I would do the light movement before you progress to that activity. That's going to be the best thing instead of, just doing what we're told to do and kind of staying on that hamster wheel and not getting anywhere with the injury rate.
Yeah, and it's funny, you didn't say it like this or whatever, but you slid in basically with talking about the girl with the hipping stretching every single day, rest and recovery. And I know at some point we'll get to rest and recovery and the value of it to yourself personally and stuff like that. But I laughed when you said it because you'd be all over me, because exactly right. I kind of wake up, I stretch every morning, and I've gotten into a routine where I try to do a couple of days and then take a day off or whatever. And sometimes you're just feeling so good, you just keep doing it or whatever. And yesterday I just decided, okay, I'm not going to do it. And I'm telling you, I woke up this morning, I had no stiffness or soreness anywhere. And so again, I'm always learning. I'm 52, everybody, or going on 52, everybody, and I'm learning every day. That's what makes this so exciting to be on with guys like Jason and have them in the network and just continue to grow and build my own mindset. So again, Jason and I both know that if you're of closed mind, if you're closed-minded, don't watch another episode. Don't watch any of the past episodes. We're not offended. It is what it is. If you're of a growth mindset and you want to learn like Jason continues to grow in his area of the field and other areas expanding, and ourselves here at Dirtbag Baseball Nation, then hey, stay with us and continue this journey with us, because we're just getting started with this. And if you're not excited about getting this acknowledged, then hey, shut her down right now. You're not a dirtbag. You're not ready to roll up the sleeves and get after it. That's for sure. So any last minute things that you really want to get across to them before we wrap this episode up, Jason, in regards to the hip and the seriousness of not only in the throwing work, but day-to-day life?
So and again, I played for probably around 20 years. And now, being back around baseball, I think one of the biggest causes for injury is a breakdown in communication. So, these coaches, it's tough for them, not placing the blame on the coach. They've got a lot of guys to take care of and maybe not a lot of time to learn. And there's a lot of bad information out there. So usually, kind of whoever's the loudest, they might repeat, what they say and think that it's good for their guys. So if a coach or a trainer is asking you to, stretch something and it doesn't feel right, don't do it. Just fake it so you appease them. So if you butt heads with them, all of a sudden I'm the head coach, I know what's best, or, I went to school for this, but, a lot of this stuff isn't taught in school. So just fake it, pretend like that's the end range. Same thing if they want you to max out with any lifts. It's a good way to rip your pec right off the bone. And that was with a strength coach that, USA weightlifting, CSCS, all that stuff. But don't max out, just fake it, pretend, oh, that's all I can do. Same thing with stretching. Just go back there into that range, but don't force it and don't constantly try to get more. I remember when I had a coach that wanted us to stretch, I could lay my arm all the way flat on the table that way. and my velocity dropped almost 10 miles an hour. When I stopped doing that and started lifting again, and I put the muscle tension back, I saw a big increase in my velocity. So that's why I have my athletes throw every time after they work out in here. So that's the big takeaway is, if you have a coach or trainer, that's wanting you to do those things, just kind of make it look like you're doing them, because you can't say, hey, coach, this hurts, because you tell your coach something hurts, you might get benched, and, sports is a shuffle. So you got 10 guys that are going to take your place. So just fake it to appease the coach if it doesn't feel right.
Absolutely.
And you know your body best. Yeah, the athlete, your body best. So don't rely on them to tell you, what the best thing is for you.
And that's what it really comes down to at the end of the day is you as a player knowing your body the best, like Jason said, and understanding how it works, days that it works great, days that it isn't, and starting to understand why that is happening. Not just, oh, well, this sucks, I'm sore today, or no. Take a second, think about why, what it was. Maybe the diet, maybe the sleep, maybe the party, and maybe, hey, too much baseball. Maybe you just need the rest or whatever and stuff like that. All right. Parents, be aware of that. Please, please, please be aware of that. Be cognizant of it, because I know we all get trapped up. I'm a parent as well. And we want to see our kids on the field, and we hate it when they're not on the field. And come on, you got to get out there. No, have that serious dialogue with them. Have that trusted communication with them, just like Jason's been talking about, so you understand whether they should be on the field or not. And that's not creating a weakling. All right. That's creating trust with your son or your daughter. That's super important. Amateur coaches in general, you are on the same path as that. That's your job. That's part of your job description, even though we don't talk about it, is respecting and trusting that your players are performing to their best, and they're talking and communicating with you, and you are with them to your best and their best. If they're not, at the end of the contract, at the end of the year, whatever your length of term is with your players, you can move on from them, or they can move on from you. But in the meantime, you've committed to them, they've committed to you. So you have to be in that trust network with them. On another note, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm telling you again right now, you've got to get this guy, you got to get his email, you got to get going with him, and you got to reach out to him and ask him these questions, because the guy knows. Jason knows this is what he does. This is what he loves to do. This is what he breathes. You hear him joke about it all the time. You know what? I love being a nerd, a baseball nerd, but it's because you've been through it, right, big man?
Yeah, I've been through it. And I think one of the things that bothered me the most was hearing somebody that people look up to get on stage and, doesn't have a performance background, more on the tech side. And he got up there in front of all these coaches and trainers and said, don't be afraid to be wrong, which is the most disappointing and just the most wrong thing you could say to a lot of people that are going there to learn. And it just so happens from that program, I've seen several guys blow their arm out. So, if they're learning from these guys that tell them, don't be afraid to be wrong, you're the athlete. So you're what's most important. So make sure you take care of yourself. And if something doesn't feel right, then don't do it.
100%, big man, for sure. And before we wrap this episode up, Dirtbags, we do want you to know that Jason has his new inventory of kinetic arms in. They arrived last week, safe and sound. He's been, and the whole team has been slugging and putting storage away. But you're ready to rock and roll again, big boy. So, hey, where can they find it?
TheKineticArm.com or any social media. The Kinetic Arm. We got team orders going out, so I'd say hurry up and place it, because these aren't gonna last too long.
For sure. You heard it. That's where it is. Get it. We've been using it. Love it. Fantastic. His model is an updated model from ours or whatever and stuff like that. Not huge significant changes, but more on getting it on to you basically or whatever. And that's still doing the same thing at the end of the day, protecting that shoulder, protecting that UCL and that arm, and making sure that you are in a good position to be able to throw safe and take that stress off. Checked. Clean up some mechanics, check. It's doing the right thing. So you want to make sure you're there. So kineticarm.com, get all over it right now. All right. any questions for Jason personally, reach out to him. You can find the information right there at the website as well, Jason, where they can contact you. As we always say, he's quick, he's responsive. He's a man of his word. So that's what's awesome about it. If you don't have questions for these, you better start having questions, because you're lying. Jason and I know it. You're lying, because we all go through it. Put our hands up. We all go through it. So take advantage of them and get all over it. So until the next episode, Jason, thank you as always, my man. Stay safe. Take care of that family. Take care of that team. And we'll see you here again real soon, buddy.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening, Dirtbags. You know what time of the week it is. Time to get up, get after it, and get dirty.